Intentional Destruction and Narcissistic Power, an insider analysis of evil Abiy Ahmed's genocidal war on Tigray, Ethiopia. By Dr. Caleb Ta, independent researcher in African political affairs and human rights, February 6, 2026. The key message of the image. The image conveys that the destruction of Tigray was not a tragic accident of war but a deliberate, controlled outcome shaped by leadership that dehumanized an entire people while remaining emotionally and morally detached from their suffering. The elevated, self-assured figure symbolizes power without empathy, while the devastated landscape, famine imagery, and blocked aid routes show starvation and siege as intentional tools rather than unintended consequences. Civilians reduced to silhouettes reflect collective punishment, an erasure of humanity, and the fractured reflection represents a narcissistic effort to manufacture reality and evade responsibility. The glowing letter signifies insider truth breaking through denial, and the faint symbols of justice in the background underscore that moral and legal accountability persist, even when power seeks to suppress them. Abstract. This article analyzes a February 5, 2026, letter by Gedu Andargachew, former Ethiopian Minister of Foreign Affairs, addressed to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed regarding parliamentary statements and the war in Tigray. Treated as a primary historical document, the letter provides rare insider testimony revealing leadership intent, strategic decision-making, and dehumanizing rhetoric during the conflict. Qualitative discourse analysis demonstrates that the devastation of Tigray was not accidental but a deliberate, systematic strategy reflecting mens rea under international law. The documented actions, including the targeting of civilians, obstruction of humanitarian aid, and maintenance of siege conditions, meet the criteria for crimes against humanity, while statements advocating the permanent crushing of Tigrayans provide evidence relevant to genocide thresholds, indicating intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a protected ethnic group. These findings challenge narratives portraying the conflict as a tragic miscalculation, situating it instead within frameworks of intentional mass atrocity, collective punishment, and leadership-driven civilian harm. By linking insider testimony with independently documented outcomes, the article advances historical accountability and contributes critical legal and moral insight into the role of state policy and leadership intent in perpetrating large-scale human suffering. Introduction. The war in Tigray, 2020 to 2022, represents one of the gravest humanitarian catastrophes of the early 21st century. While extensive documentation has established the scale of civilian suffering, famine, and infrastructural destruction, debates persist regarding intent. Were these outcomes the tragic consequences of a complex civil war, or were they the result of deliberate policy choices? This article argues the latter. Using Gedu Andargachew's February 5, 2026, letter as a primary source, it demonstrates that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed possessed foreknowledge of civilian risk, rejected mitigating measures, and articulated a vision of irreversible collective defeat for the people of Tigray. The letter exposes a governing mindset characterized by narcissism, crudity, and strategic indifference to human life. Methodology and source significance. This study employs qualitative discourse analysis of a February 5, 2026, letter authored by Gedu Andargachew, treating it as a primary historical document of exceptional evidentiary value. The letter constitutes a rare act of insider disclosure in which a senior former state official chose transparency over silence in the interest of historical truth, moral accountability, and national reckoning. Gedu's prior service in high-level executive and diplomatic roles within Abiy Ahmed's administration afforded him direct exposure to decision-making processes, internal deliberations, and early wartime diplomacy. By voluntarily placing his first-hand knowledge on the public record, he provides an indispensable bridge between leadership intent and subsequent outcomes, enabling scholars to examine the war in Tigray with a level of clarity and factual grounding that would otherwise remain inaccessible. Crudeness and dehumanization, language as a tool of collective punishment. One of the most revealing aspects of Gede's account is his direct quotation of Abiy Ahmed's private remarks regarding the people of Tigray. Abiy is reported to have stated, "Do not think the Tigrayans can recover from this defeat and rise again. We have crushed them so they will not rise. Who are the people of Tigray above? We will break them even further. The Tigray we once knew will never return." Gede and Dargiture, 2026. This language is analytically significant for three reasons. First, it collapses the distinction between combatants and civilians, treating an entire population as a legitimate target. Second, it frames destruction as irreversible and desirable, signaling an intention not merely to defeat an armed group but to incapacitate a society permanently. Third, it portrays empathy itself as illegitimate, suggesting that concern for civilian suffering represents unjustified favoritism. In atrocity studies, such rhetoric is a well-established precursor to mass violence, functioning to morally disengage perpetrators and normalize extreme measures against the dehumanized population.
Maybe a word about what is the aim of Ethiopia. When I met the Ethiopian leadership in February, they really used this kind of language that they are going to destroy the Tigrayans, they are going to wipe out the Tigrayans for 100 years and so forth, which for me referred to very serious human rights atrocities and crimes as well. If you wipe out your national minority, what is it? You cannot destroy all the people, you cannot destroy all the population in Tigray, and I think that's very obvious that we have to react and because it looks for us like ethnic cleansing. It is a very, very serious act if this is true.
Narcissistic leadership and the manufacture of reality. Gede's letter also documents the systematic distortion of truth by Abiy Ahmed, a hallmark of narcissistic political leadership. Abiy publicly claimed in parliament that Gede served as his envoy to Eritrea to plead for the protection of Tigrayan civilians. Gede categorically refutes this claim, noting that he had resigned as foreign minister days after the war began and that no such humanitarian message was conveyed. This misrepresentation serves a clear psychological and political function. It retroactively constructs a moral self-image in which Abiy appears as a concerned protector rather than an architect of destruction. In narcissistic governance, factual accuracy is subordinate to self-exoneration, and witnesses are repurposed as symbolic shields against accountability. Such behavior undermines institutional truth, corrodes historical memory, and obstructs reconciliation by denying victims acknowledgement of their suffering. Absence of empathy and the rejection of protective measures. Perhaps the most damning evidence of intent lies in Abiy Ahmed's explicit rejection of measures that could have reduced civilian harm. Gede recounts that when he questioned why Eritrean forces were not formally asked to withdraw from Tigray, despite public declarations that the war had ended and mounting international concern, Abiy instructed him not to raise the issue under any circumstances. The diplomatic message delivered to Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki instead focused on 1. Congratulating Eritrea on joint military success. 2. Expressing gratitude for military cooperation, and 3. Coordinating responses to human rights allegations. Notably absent was any concern for civilian suffering. This omission is not accidental. It reveals a hierarchy of priorities in which political survival, alliance maintenance, and reputational risk outweighed the lives of millions of civilians.
Ethiopia. We have no proof of the presence of Eritrean troops inside Ethiopia. I confronted the Prime Minister with that question, and he guaranteed to me that they have not entered Tigrayan territory, that the only area where they are is the area that corresponded to the disputed territory between the two countries that in the peace agreement was decided to give back to Eritrea. So this was the testimony that was given to me by the Prime Minister when I confronted him exactly with that question.
Intentional harm, Tigray's destruction as strategy. Gedu's testimony directly contradicts narratives portraying the war's humanitarian consequences as unintended. He recounts that Abiy Ahmed later publicly articulated a strategy of gradually rendering Tigray ineffective. When combined with the maintenance of joint Ethiopian, Eritrean military operations, the refusal to withdraw foreign forces, and the dismantling of civilian administration, this strategy aligns with classic siege warfare and collective punishment. International investigations have independently documented widespread destruction of healthcare systems, agricultural capacity, and basic infrastructure in Tigray, resulting in famine-like conditions and long-term societal harm. Gedu's account provides the missing link between outcome and intent. Moral and legal implications. Mens rea and intent in international criminal law. In international criminal law, mens rea, the mental element of a crime, is decisive in distinguishing tragic wartime harm from prosecutable atrocity. Crimes against humanity and genocide do not require spontaneous hatred or chaos. They require knowledge and intent, which may be inferred from patterns of conduct, policy decisions, and statements by senior leadership. Gedu and Argich's letter provides direct and circumstantial evidence of mens rea at the highest level of the Ethiopian state. Abiy Ahmed is described as possessing clear foreknowledge of civilian vulnerability, receiving explicit warnings regarding lawlessness and abuse, and rejecting proposals designed to mitigate harm. His quoted statements about having crushed the people of Tigray and his expressed desire that the Tigray we once knew will never return indicate not merely awareness of harm, but an aspiration toward irreversible collective incapacitation. Under Article 7 of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, crimes against humanity require that acts such as extermination, persecution, or other inhumane acts be committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against the civilian population, with knowledge of the attack. Gedu's testimony supports each of these elements. The attack was systematic, state-directed, and undertaken with full awareness of its civilian consequences. Genocide thresholds and the question of specific intent. Genocide, as defined by the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, requires dolus specialis, the specific intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a protected group as such. While judicial determination of genocide rests with competent courts, Gedu's account supplies evidence relevant to this threshold. Statements attributed to Abiy Ahmed reflect an intent to destroy the social, political, and economic foundations of Tigrayan existence. The language of permanent destruction, combined with policies that enabled famine, administrative collapse, and the sustained presence of foreign occupying forces, aligns with acts enumerated under Article 2(c) of the Genocide Convention, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about a group's physical destruction in whole or in part. Importantly, international jurisprudence recognizes that genocidal intent may be inferred from conduct when direct orders are absent. The coordinated siege of Tigray, the destruction of healthcare and agriculture, and the obstruction of humanitarian aid, when paired with leadership rhetoric rejecting the legitimacy of the group's survival, form a coherent pattern from which specific intent may be inferred. Famine, siege, and humanitarian blockade as atrocity crimes. Independent investigations by the United Nations, humanitarian organizations, and academic researchers have documented that Tigray was subjected to conditions consistent with siege warfare, mass displacement, destruction of food systems, looting of livestock, dismantling of medical infrastructure, and severe restrictions on humanitarian access. Gedu's letter establishes the political origin of these conditions. His account confirms that Eritrean forces remained integrated with Ethiopian operations until the Pretoria Agreement, and that Abiy Ahmed explicitly refused to request their withdrawal despite international pressure and civilian suffering. This decision-making context is critical, as international law treats starvation of civilians as a method of warfare as a war crime and, when part of a widespread or systematic attack, as a crime against humanity. By prioritizing coordination against accountability over civilian protection, Abiy Ahmed's administration allowed famine-like conditions to persist. The blockade was not merely a logistical failure, it was the foreseeable outcome of intentional policies maintained despite full knowledge of their effects. Command responsibility and superior liability. Under the doctrine of command responsibility, civilian and military leaders may be held criminally responsible if they knew or should have known that subordinates were committing crimes and failed to prevent or punish them. Gadou's testimony indicates that Abiy Ahmed exercised effective control over military and diplomatic decisions, was informed of abuses, and reacted not by halting them but by suppressing discussion and managing reputational risk. The refusal to investigate, the anger directed at those who raised concerns, and the fabrication of humanitarian intent after the facts strengthen the case for superior responsibility. These actions suggest not negligence but conscious acquiescence. Ethical collapse and the denial of accountability. Beyond legal frameworks, Gadou's letter illustrates a profound ethical collapse in leadership. The absence of apology, the rewriting of history, and the deflection of blame represent not only moral failure but active obstruction of reconciliation. As Gadou notes, the refusal to seek forgiveness after mass suffering prevents societal learning and perpetuates cycles of violence. In this context, Abiy Ahmed's conduct reflects a governing philosophy in which power is preserved through denial rather than accountability, and survival is pursued through perpetual conflict rather than social repair. Annex: Legal mapping of facts to elements of crimes. Factual finding, from Gadou and Dargachu, relevant legal element and explanation. Abiy Ahmed expressed desire to permanently crush Tigray. Specific intent, dolus specialis, for genocide. Language indicates intent to destroy a group in whole or part, genocide convention art. 2. Rejection of measures to withdraw Eritrean forces despite warnings, knowledge and consent. Command responsibility leadership was aware of civilian harm and prevented mitigating action. Rome Statute Art. 28. Refusal to address civilian suffering in diplomatic instructions. Crimes against humanity, inhumane acts. Prioritizing political/military concerns over civilian life constitutes part of systematic attack. Rome Statute Art. 7. Maintenance of siege, destruction of healthcare and food systems, crimes against humanity, and potential genocide. Infliction of conditions calculated to destroy a protected group, Art. 7. Genocide Convention Art. 2c. Misrepresentation of humanitarian intent to Parliament. Obstruction of accountability, moral disengagement. Fabrication of narrative to evade legal/political responsibility, consistent with patterns of systematic attacks. Suppression of internal warnings. Superior responsibility, command liability. Knowledge of abuses without prevention or punishment triggers liability for subordinates' crimes. Coordination with Eritrean military forces in offensive operations, Joint Commission of War Crimes/Crimes against Humanity. State-directed multi-party operations knowingly causing civilian harm.